Today, we are still in the Just Ask Me series, this Ask Me series, and as we're walking through these different topics, these are things that we would like to have answers for our faith, but also there are other people that we've met that we should be able to answer some of these questions if they ask. Now, our topic today is simply this. Our topic today is, what do we do when God and science do not agree? What do we do when God and science don't agree? Now, I'm going to say this right up front. I do not have enough time in this message this morning to cover this adequately. So what we're going to do today is going to be a quick run through some things that I'm going to lay the foundation of some things in our minds. If you have more questions about that, please feel free to contact me afterwards or later this week. Send me an email. We can have a deeper discussion. But this topic has books and books and books written about it. And so there's no way that in my 31 minutes now that I have left to share with you today that we're going to be able to completely cover this topic. But I do think this is something that people are struggling with in our world today. Science is telling us one thing, and God seems to be telling us another thing, and we're not sure at times who we ought to believe or what happened there. Now, let me begin by saying this. I do not believe that God and science disagree. Boy, that was two negatives, wasn't it? God and science agree. But some scientists and some other godly scientists don't agree on many things. And so I believe that God is the God of the entire universe. I believe that God is the God of science. But I also know this, that the conclusions that some scientists draw completely agree with God's purposes, and some of the conclusions that scientists draw completely disagree with what God has to say and his purposes. Now, in many people's mind, God and science are kind of on two opposite sides, kind of like in a boxing ring, continually kind of taking swings at each other, and we're waiting to see who's going to come out on top. I don't give science that much credit. Let me just say that right up front. Science is a powerful tool in the hands of men, but it pales in comparison with the power and the ability of God. Now, when secular scientists come up with a reason for why life operates the way that it does, typically what they'll do is they'll credit the laws of the universe. Now, when a Christian scientist will see that same evidence, they'll credit God for the way he designed the universe to act. So in one simple discovery, sometimes it's the perspective we come into it with. Some will find the complexity of the universe. Others will find the complexity of a God who designed the universe. Now, I think I need to begin by saying a little bit of this. There have been many Christian scientists over time that have laid the foundation for a lot of the work in science that's still being done today. There are many, many, many devout Christians who have chosen science and the fields of science as their fields of study. As a matter of fact, we wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the discoveries of many of the scientists through the years who are also devoutly Christian. I'll just name a few. And I know some of you will not recognize these names and some of you will, and that's okay. Michael Faraday was a devout member of his church, an elder at his church, and he's credited with discovering electromagnetic induction. I know some of you are thinking, I don't even know what that is, but thank you for doing that. We wouldn't have things like motors today without this discovery. Arthur Compton was a deacon in his Baptist church. He's credited with discovering, now I got to be careful here because Einstein theorized this but didn't prove it, but Compton did, that light behaves as a particle as well as a wave. And he coined the word photon to describe a particle of light. Isaac Newton, now maybe that's a name that you might recognize. He actually spent more time studying his Bible than he did physics and math. And yet he's credited with discovering the law of gravity, the law of physics, the three laws of motion, and also credited with inventing calculus. So now you know who to blame for your bad high school experience. Charles Towns was a member of the United Church of Christ, and he wrote books trying to integrate science and religion. He is credited with inventing the laser. So if you're actually watching this service right now at home over the internet, you have his invention of the laser and fiber optic networks to credit with the idea that you can even watch this live as we do it today. Another one, George Washington Carver. Maybe that's a name you might recognize. He was an evangelist, actually, a traveling evangelist and an agriculturalist. And he discovered that our soil needs nitrogen to produce crops. He was the father of the invention of chemical fertilizer in our fields. Now, he also discovered, what was that thing he discovered? Peanuts, yeah. So peanut butter. So if you survive high school, you probably have him to credit for the fact that you made it through high school with the amount of peanut butter I ate, at least going through high school. Florence Nightingale, a nurse who became a nurse because she felt a calling from God to become a nurse. She was a devout Anglican and known mostly for her nursing, but one of the things that she championed that became a worldwide cause for her to back was actually the sanitary reforms that have now been credited with adding up to 20 years to the lifespans of human beings across the earth. So when we talk about crediting certain medicines as saving people's lives, Florence Nightingale actually was one of the first people that says, you should wash your hands. And we think, what's the big deal with that? But those simple things to do to make sure that we were clean has actually done more to prolong our life than just about anything else. Committed Christian. And there's hundreds of others. And I could talk about Alessandro Volta and Blaise Pascal. Actually, I quoted Blaise Pascal last week. John Ambrose Fleming, Samuel Morse, Morse code, Robert Boyle. They all were devoutly Christian people who had huge advances in science that we experience the benefit of today. As a matter of fact, as we look back through history, the development of science can be credited to the church and to Christian benefactors who underwrote scientists through the centuries of work. This last few centuries, we've kind of seen science and the church at times a little bit at odds, but there was a time when the only reason that scientists could do experimentation and could look into their learning, into their laboratories, was because they were underwritten by benefactors. Many of those benefactors were through the church. So today I want to take a very simple format and say, we're going to talk a little bit about where science and God completely agree. And then we're going to talk about some places where modern-day science and God don't agree. So let's pray, and then we'll dive into some things. Father, this morning, I realize the things that we're talking about this morning may not have the weight and the impact of, like Ed's meditation this morning, about the depth of Christ's sacrifice for us. But Father, these are things that people in our world are wrestling with every day in their thinking. They're things at times that we wrestle with, because we listen and hear from people in our world every day. And so, Father, I pray that you will allow us the benefit of maybe just a glimpse of some of what you know and the beauty of what you've designed this universe to be. And I pray this now in your Son's name. Amen. So let's begin here. Where do God and science agree? And I'm going to give you a few things that they agree on here pretty quickly. So if you're taking notes, you might want to fill these in on the back of your program bulletin today. So one of the places they agree is the order of the existence of living things. So when we talk about the conflict between God and science, most of the time we jump immediately to the idea of creation and evolution. Was this world put together and designed by a God, by a creator? Or was this world, did it all come together by an evolutionary process aided by lots of time and random chance? What I find interesting is, regardless of what opinion people hold to, they agree in the order in which things had to come about. So listen for a minute. It begins with light or a big bang. Then there's a formation of worlds and planets. Then there's the separation between the land and the sea. And then they all agree that life begins in the sea. Plants are next, and then the birds, and then the things that crawl along the ground, and then there's mammals that live upon the ground, and finally it ends with human beings. And here's the amazing thing. It's the same series of events, whether you read Genesis 1 or you read Darwin's Origin of Species. Both dominant theories for how life came to exist in the universe agree upon the order in which it had to develop for us to be here. Now I'm going to make a comment here, for whatever you think this is worth. But if I had to guess, I'm guessing that Darwin borrowed from Genesis. I don't think Genesis borrowed from Darwin. It's just a guess, okay? But the order of the existence of living things is something that we do agree on. This is the order it needed to happen in. The second thing that we agree on is scientific method. Scientific method is basically, it says we observe to determine what consistently happens in our universe to establish the laws of the universe. And then scientific method examines what happens on Earth. It recreates some of that with experiments, and it verifies the experiments and then repeats them over and over and over and over again. It subjects them to trials and verifies the results, and then they will claim, eventually science will claim, that this seems to be the way the universe works, and then we create a law of the universe. Or if you're a Christian scientist, you would say it like this. This seems to be the way God created the universe to work. And the number of times in the Bible where we're encouraged to examine creation so that we can learn something is pretty significant. Actually, if you read through the Bible, you'll find many times the Bible says if you really want to understand the nature of the universe, the nature of God, the nature of man, how he put it all in place, you need to open your eyes and look around. Psalm 143:5 says this, I remember the days of long ago. I meditate on all your works and consider what you have done. Psalm 111:2 says, great are the works of the Lord. They are pondered by all who delight in them. One of my favorite passages of the Old Testament is Job chapters 38 and 39. And I'm pretty sure you probably didn't read those this morning for your devotion, so let me remind you what's in there a little bit. But these chapters urge us to look at creation and to understand something about the order of the universe. And in that order, they want us to understand how much higher is the ability and the thinking and the power of God than is the power and understanding of man. I'll read a little bit more from from Job toward the end of the message today. When John Glenn was in space, he was part of that moonwalking group in 1969. Do you remember what he said? Not the one small step thing. We all remember that. In fact, I don't even think that was John Glenn who said that. But he said this, to look out at this kind of creation and not believe in God, to me, is impossible. It just has to be put together by some great architect. And here's what I would say. While some examine nature, they see the glory of the universe. Others examine nature and they see the glory of God who created a universe. But scientific method is not Christian. Scientific method is not anti-Christian. Both Christian and non-Christian scientists look at things and the way things work and examine them over and over again and test them over and over again to determine either how God made it to work or how the universe works. Scientific method is consistent. The third thing, both science and God would agree on this, that mankind has a curiosity and a learning spirit. We are curious people. And you can take that both ways. Some of us are pretty curious looking. But by nature, we're also curious people. We want to know why things happen. We want to know how they work. We want to figure them out. We have this insatiable appetite to discover new things. And this curiosity feeds the sciences. This curiosity also feeds the study of God. We are curious about the things that we don't understand yet. And God created human beings with a high capacity to master new knowledge and to do new things. We are high capacity beings. And God intended us to be this way. There's a story in Genesis chapter 11, and it's the story of the Tower of Babel. So this is after the flood, and Noah actually is toward the end of his life, and the world is being repopulated by people. And with the growth of civilization, mankind is working together, and they're doing things they've never done before. This restart of mankind is actually working pretty well. And God had given them a command when they had come out of the ark. He said basically, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. In other words, he told them basically, have lots of kids and scatter everywhere you can. There's this great big earth, go find every little part of it and go everywhere. But the Tower of Babel tells a different story, that mankind decided instead of to scatter, to gather in one place and to build a huge city, and in the middle of this city, a tower that the Bible says would reach to the heavens. Now, I don't know how tall that is. Actually, archaeology and history doesn't even tell us how tall that tower was. But what I find interesting was this, that when God observed what men were trying to do on earth, I want you to listen to the comment he makes about the nature of mankind. He says this, Genesis 11:6. If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Nothing will be impossible for them. God knows that the capacity in humankind is enormous. We have this enormous ability to learn new things, to put them into practice. As a matter of fact, the only thing we're limited by is by time and resource at times, and the things that we can learn to do. And there's been such amazing advances in our sciences over these last couple of centuries. Medicine, architecture, math, geology, archaeology, mechanical sciences, physics, astronomy, rocket science. I mean, rocket science, there ought to be a better word for that, I think. But anyway, isn't it amazing? I think we have one man in this world that if he sells one more company in with a public offering, an IPO, I think he's going to start to put airports up for space. I mean, honestly. I mean, this is how, like, literally 100 years ago, we weren't even thinking about space flight, and now we've got somebody that's saying, hey, I think we could do it like every other day. And that's just a few of the sciences. Actually, there's over 54 sciences listed right now on your favorite Google internet search. 54 different sciences. And God knew that as human beings, we would be constantly advancing. And he wants us to discover this universe. He wants us to understand its complexity. He wants us to learn how to do things better. And science has the same aim, to understand this universe and to do things better. So God and science, I want to be very clear, it's not like they hate each other. They really do cooperate to do some things very well. But God and science don't always agree. And I want to take probably a little bit longer to talk a little bit about where they disagree and where I believe that God needs to be in the middle of science. Number one, I think where they disagree is on the methods of experimentation. Methods of experimentation. In the rush to learn more, there have been some scientists who have acted immorally in their search for knowledge. You see, we can't just go after knowledge without protecting the sanctity of people groups and individual human life. There have been some in the process of experimentation who have crossed over that line from helping the human race to hurting human people. Now probably the most obvious example of this, and I would say in our lifetime, but this really pushes the limits of our lifetime a bit, was in Nazi Germany. The experiments that were done in concentration camps on those prisoners and prisoners of war in those camps. And the methods they used to experiment with and the carelessness with which they valued human life, honestly, it gave birth to a whole series of war trials. It wasn't just the generals and the people that were being prosecuted at the end of the war. It was doctors and scientists who were being prosecuted at the end of the war for the things that they did to people in those camps. 23 doctors were tried, 7 of them were executed for their crimes against mankind. And they experimented with things like this: the high altitude atmospheric pressures and freezing. I know that was something you were thinking about just this morning, right? But to advance aviation, they would put prisoners in low-pressure chambers to stimulate higher altitudes, then submerge them in freezing vats of water. And they killed dozens of people trying to figure out how to help their pilots overcome hypothermia and hypoxia as they flew at higher altitudes in that freezing cold. Vaccines and antibiotics were greatly experimented with during this time, all for the sake of science. Thousands of people in those prison camps were deliberately infected with pathogens like malaria, typhus, and tuberculosis to test possible cures and possible immunizations. They did genetic and sterilization studies in those concentration camps. Matter of fact, some of the most notorious tests that they talk about, they would take twins and they would subject one of them to the most horrific experiences, and then later they would actually kill them and examine their bodies to see how it affected their internal organs, these different experiences, because they figured the twins were enough alike, you'd have a control group and then one that had been experimented on. In genetic studies, sterilization studies, researchers used various methods to force sterilization on different people groups through x-rays and chemical injections and surgeries to limit the populations of people groups that they deemed were racially inferior. And it wasn't just the world that stood up in outrage. It was the Christian people of the world that stood up and said, that's got to stop. We can't do that. That's not what God intended science to be used for. You see, if you believe purely in science and the theories of natural selection, then the needs or the value of the individual does not matter in light of the propagation and the progress of the species. That was one of the unintended consequences of Darwin's Origin of Species. Individuals didn't matter, only the good of the whole mattered. But it's Christian thinking, and specifically God's teaching, that says there is a value to every person. God adopts every one of us, each one of us, as sons and daughters into his family. Psalm 139 tells us that each of us have been beautifully and wonderfully made, that we were knit together by God in the wombs of our mothers, that human life is precious and to be valued, that the life of the individual cannot be forcibly set aside, even for the good of the whole. Every human being has value in the eyes of God. And there have been some scientists, I won't say all because it's not true, some that by their nature are willing to sacrifice individuals for the sake of science. God, as he begins his story with mankind, begins with the value of human life. In the beginning, God just did not create. He culminates his creation with the creation of mankind. And in that creation, he sets aside two individuals, an Adam and an Eve, and he has a personal relationship with them. He loved them. He walked with them. He saw value in them. The beginning of God's study of science begins with the thought of this, is that my children are more important than all of this. So the first thing that it begins is where we differ with science is on some of the methods of experimentation that some have taken. Not all, some have taken. The second thing I would say is on the origins of the universe, and this is where you all thought this message might be headed, and so let's go. Let's go there for a little bit. Was this universe designed with intention from God, or is it the product of evolution and random chance? And I would say I have three basic reasons or three basic arguments in my eyes that push me for the belief in God as the designer and creator of our universe over the idea of purely evolution and random chance. And I'm just going to share them with you simply. My first reason I believe in God as the creator instead of an evolution to describe what's happened here on earth is really the Bible story and its record. The biblical record in Genesis tells us that God is at the center of the formation and the creation of the universe. Maybe you've heard these words before. Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters, and God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, and we could walk through 6 days of creation where it talks about how God formed things. And because the Bible tells us that God did this, I believe that God did this. I have found the biblical record to be accurate. My experience in life has shown me the Bible is more reliable than any other book that I've ever looked at. And while I wish Genesis had included more details, the scientific part of my brain wishes there was more details there. It does tell us, I think, the most important detail, that God was at the center of the existence of our universe, causing something to happen. And that's an immovable fact for me in my faith. The Bible says it, and I believe that God did it. The second thing is this, is I think the complexity of creation defies evolution's ability to explain what's here. There is such a wide variety of life on this earth right now. And some of life, they are absolutely right. They share similar genetic traits or similar DNA or RNA samples that we can go all the way back to possibly amoebas and amino acids. And yet that similarity doesn't necessarily explain to us today why there are, just for instance, 64,000 different types of trees on the earth. Why do we need 64,000 different types of trees? Now, I get it. There's different climates for different trees. I've lived in different climates in my life, and there are different trees. I love, in Michigan, we have this saying, we're going to go up north, which is it's a Michigan thing. And basically, if you get north of Mount Pleasant, which nobody knows where that is, Mount Pleasant, Michigan. But you get north of Mount Pleasant, you're up north. And the trees are different there. I mean, literally, there's forest and forest and forest. And if you walk through those, they're very different than the forests of here, of this region. The trees are just different. And it's not less beautiful or more beautiful, it's just different. And there's such a wide variety of trees. There is a complexity to the things that do exist on this earth that are hard for us. We can't even explain them, really. Even with all of our science that we've walked through, we have a hard time explaining how things actually work. I mean, we're working on it. We're learning more and more every day. We're getting better at it. But even within our own bodies, we struggle to explain exactly how our bodies work in the way that they don't work at times. I mean, in our own bodies, we have dozens of different types of cells. We're not made up of one type of cell. We're made up with dozens of different types of cells. And your brain cells are different than your muscle cells and different than your skin cells and different than your neurons and different than your intestines. And I'm grateful for that because I don't want to look at people's intestines. I'm glad they're not on the outside of our skin. That would be just ugly. I wouldn't want to picture that in anyone. But medical science is still trying to figure out how our bodies work, let alone understand how they exactly came to be. And we need to understand that our sciences, while they're amazing, are in the infancy stages of things that they're learning about our universe. Now, some scientists would say that because there's similar genetic tracing back through the lines of mammals or birds or reptiles, to even to some simple organisms, and they would say, well, that's proof that we've all come from the same source. But it could just as easily be proof that we were created by the same being. life on this planet is a carbon-oxygen-based system that can only exist in certain ways through the laws of simple chemistry. And God knew what works on this world, and I believe he created life and designed it in this way, and it only works in certain ways. I think the variety and the complexity of life and the life in our universe defies the ability of evolution to completely explain the complexity of it. But to me, it makes perfect sense if you consider a creative and imaginative God who purposely wanted to delight his creation with as many things as he could. So two things so far about the origin of the universe. I think the biblical record would lean toward a creator. I think the complexity of creation leans, in my mind, toward a designer. And then the third thing I would say is the statistical improbability of evolution bothers me. The math involved for this to randomly occur is pretty astronomical. Now, I'm not a mathematician. I'm a theologian. But I understand enough about statistics to know that when the numbers get really big, things get less likely to happen. For every step in the evolutionary process to happen, not only does life need to be established, but then a variance of life needs to exist, and that variance of life needs to continue to exist and to evolve as it exists. And at each stage of these transitions, the statistics involved on whether or not that could actually happen aren't small. They're not 50-50. It might happen, it might not. They're actually huge. I'm going to give you an example, and this isn't an example of statistical probability for evolution because I have no idea how to figure that out. But I have in my hands right now 10 cards, 10 playing cards from a regular deck. They're diamonds. It's ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Just 10 cards. And if I were to lay them out right now in order, 1, 2, ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I know you can't see them, but they're in order. And they're in order because I chose to put them in order. Because I knew what the order was that would make sense, 1 through 10, and I put them in that order, 1 through 10. Matter of fact, I already selected them out of a deck of 52 cards, and I just chose these. Because I picked a bad deck this morning when I came in and I was missing other cards. I had to use the diamonds because it was the only ones that I had that had all the cards in them. But statistically, if I were to take these cards and just shuffle them and say the only way life can happen is if it lines up just like that, just 1 through 10. So if I shuffle these cards and I just randomly try to do that, 2, 6, 7, 3, 4, 10, 8, ace, 5, 9. Not one of those cards is in the right order. Now, if you do the statistics, I can do this math. If I just randomly shuffle and put them out, there are 3,628,000 different variations of how those cards can be laid out. Just 10 cards and just the diamonds. Okay? Now, here's what I know is these cards are pretty simple. And the order they need to be in is pretty simple for us to understand. Now let's go to something as complicated as the human genome, where there are 23 pairs of chromosomes that it takes to make up a human being. Now, 22 of those are necessary in every human being, and they're pretty much very, very similar. And then one of those genes is different in 50% of us because it determines the gender of the person involved, the 23rd chromosome. If I had 23 cards that we had to lay out in order today, instead of just 10, just 23. And these are cards. These aren't things as sophisticated as amino acids making up DNA. This is just simple playing cards. And I tried to lay out 23 of them in a row and shuffled. Anybody want to guess at the odds of that? I had to use my computer to figure this number out, and I still don't quite get it. As a matter of fact, I should have put it on the screen behind you. But for that to come out in the right order, it would be 258 septillion. 1 in 258 septillion. So that's 258 with 21 zeros after it. And these are just playing cards. These are simple things. And so for me personally, and I understand there are scientists that would disagree with this, and I get that. But for me personally, even over billions of years, evolution, I believe, is still statistically impossible without help. And all of this is proof to me that life cannot exist without God. It can't exist without guidance. And here's the thing is, I already know the one who guided it. I already have a belief in the one who put it all together, the one who made it happen. In Job 38 and 39, I told you I was going to read a few of these verses later. But God is making actually his case to Job about the fact that, Job, there's only so much that you can understand about life. And there's so much more that I get in life that you never will. And he goes on this rant for 2 whole chapters to say, Job, where were you when this happened? Where were you when this happened? Do you even understand any of this? Let me read a few of them. Job 38, 4 and 5. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Oh, surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it to know? Job 39. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom or spread its wings toward the south because you decided it? Does the eagle soar at your command and build his nest on high? Another one from Job 38. Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Can you raise your voice to the clouds and cover yourself with a flood of water? Do you send the lightning bolts on their way? Do they report to you and say, oh, here we are, ready for duty? And God is making the case before Job, and he says, listen, it's not even that I understand these things. I created these things. I set them down. And yet you choose as a human being to question me, my authority, and my ability. Folks, we are still trying to explain how some of the things on our earth function. And God is claiming not only does he know how they function, but that he designed them to function that way. He was intelligent enough and powerful enough to make them happen the way that they happen. And I believe there is no life without a God to design it, to create it, and to guide it. All right, I'm lost in my outline here and I'm running out of time, so let me hurry. There's one other way that I think that God and science disagree, and that is in the application of science, and I'll go quickly here. In this area, I would say that science needs God. Because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. The morality of choices of how to implement what we discover needs a greater voice than just we can do it, so we will do it. It needs a voice of morality and wisdom to guide it. Let me give you a couple examples here for a minute. We all are familiar in some levels with atomic power. Matter of fact, there's not very far from here that there's an atomic power plant that powers part of northwestern Ohio. Here's the thing about atomic power. Guided right, it runs cities. Guided wrong, it blows them up. Here's the thing, like in vitro surgery, it can be used to save a life as early as 6 weeks within the womb of a mother, 6 weeks old, or it can be used to abort a life within the mother. Computers, the processing power of computers are amazing today. They can be harnessed to create art and music, to record our thoughts. The message that you're hearing right now today didn't come from AI, just to let you know. But it was spell checked by a computer, thank goodness. And they can do something to create something that's beautiful, or they can be used to data mine your personal information and steal all of your money out of your bank account. There has to be some moral guide given to science to know what to do with what we've discovered. And the morals that I trust are not the morals that men make up and change with every generation or every half generation. I choose to follow the morality of a God whose opinions about life and what is right and wrong have not changed since the beginning of the creation of the earth. I choose to follow the sanctity of life. I choose to believe that because God created human beings, that each one has intrinsic value and worth. I believe science needs God in the guidance of its application. So, conclusion. What do we do when God and science don't agree? I think, number one, we keep on learning and discovering. We don't give up on it. Even though we don't agree with some of the conclusions, we don't give up. We keep learning. We keep pushing. We keep discovering. Number two, we ensure that the intrinsic value of each human being is upheld. In no way can we allow science to dictate to us who's important and who's less important, or who can be exercised against or experimented on and who can't be. And number three, we advocate for a universe that is here by design, not by evolution. We have to be willing to speak up and to say, this could not happen without a designer. You see, we serve a God who created science, and the entire reason that the universe can be explained, I believe, is because God logically laid it out and would like us to discover it. I believe that the more we study God in science, the better we'll understand the world around us. I believe the more that we study our world, the more that we'll see God in science. And here's my simple conclusion. We need science, but we need God more. We need God more. Will you stand with me? I'm going to pray. We're going to finish up. Father, I realize today that this topic is so much larger than what I was able to give it time for today. But Father, I want us to walk away from this with just a sense that we need you in this. That, Father, that this is not just about a war of ideas between groups of people. But Father, at the heart of it is this idea that, Father, that you created this world beautifully and knowingly, and that you want us to know it and understand it, and you want us to follow it and to understand you better as we study it. And so, Father, may we fall in love again with the sciences and the beauty of what they show us about our universe. But Father, in that, may we fall even more in love with you, the one who created the universe, the one who created each and every one of us specifically, the one who called each one of us by name and allowed us to be part of your family, the one, each one of us that you have purposely saved, Father, because you love us too much to leave us in darkness. Father, may we fall more and more in love with you. And Father, all of this I lay right now at your feet, and I just praise you. And we praise you because of who you are and because of what you've done for us. So Father, hear these words of our praise today as we finish.